Matrix was released in 1999 and is a bona fide sci-fi masterpiece. There is no doubt about it. The Matrix is not only one of my favorite films, nor is it one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made. The Matrix is one of the greatest movies ever made. So let's talk about The Matrix, and eventually we're going to talk about Reloaded and Revolutions leading up to the release of Matrix Resurrections later this month, because that's got a lot of people hyped right now. Even though the sequels kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and I'm not really looking forward to Resurrections all that much, I am cautiously optimistic that last trailer that was released recently was actually a lot better than the first one. So it's got my interest, we'll say that. But when it comes to the actual sequels, I'm very mixed on Reloaded, and I strongly dislike Revolutions, but that's another story for when we get to those reviews. Here we are going to talk about the first film in the trilogy, The Matrix. So as I said, The Matrix was released in 1999. It was written and directed by the Wachowskis. It stars Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Carrie-Anne Moss, Hugo Weaving, Joe Pantoliano as an asshole. When isn't Joe Pantoliano an asshole? And if, just in case you haven't seen The Matrix, I am gonna go into detail about the movie. So if you have yet to see any of the Matrix movies, this is your warning. This is a spoiler warning for The Matrix. The Matrix was so influential when it came out. There were movies after this that came out that either good or bad, that either were inspired by The Matrix or completely ripped off The Matrix. The one with Jet Li, complete rip-off of The Matrix. I have never seen a more blatant rip-off of a movie ever. But there's no doubt that even some of the plot devices and the plot elements did influence movies that came out that year. I mean, it's probably just a coincidence. When you look at one of the plot elements of The Matrix and compare it to The Phantom Menace and what happens in the rest of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, both have a story about the Chosen One, how there's this prophecy, this one and only being that is going to save all. And The Matrix was really smack dab right in the middle of that. It was one of those first movies that had that Chosen One prophecy that I think is overdone to death in movies today. It's a big reason why I didn't gravitate towards Dune, because I just said to myself, this is another Chosen One prophecy movie, and I'm blaming the book for Dune as well. But The Matrix was also influential in other things. It's been influential across every medium. I mean, there's even Matrix video games, like Enter the Matrix was one of the most fun video games I've had, even though it got terrible reviews. I just played that one level where you could play as Niobe or Ghost. It was where you had to go answer the phone. You were just jumping off rooftops. You could fight one of the agents if you wanted to. That was a really fun game, but it even has populated other elements of pop culture. It's got a huge influence on many of the TV shows that we consume nowadays. I assume that The Matrix has had an influence on the music industry as well. There's a rock band that I really like called Chevelle, who recently just came out with a new album called Naratius, which stands for Nothing is Real and This is a Simulation. Even though some of the themes of that album aren't present in the Matrix movie, you can tell that ideas of reality versus fantasy and this fake reality are present in other forms of media and entertainment. So yeah, The Matrix was hugely influential to the entertainment industry and to various filmmakers who tried to copy it. I mean, I already talked about the one with Jet Li. Talk about ripping off scenes from The Matrix. Battlefield Earth, such a terrible movie, but they rip off bullet time like mad crazy. The video game Max Payne also has an element in that video game where you can choose to enter bullet time, clearly influenced by The Matrix. And what really grabs me from the get-go, other than the opening scene of The Matrix, is its style and its presentation. The Matrix feels like it is adapted from a comic book or an anime or a manga, and it's not. It's a completely original idea, because when you think of something like The Matrix, you think of, oh, hey, that's a cyberpunk story. That's why they're wearing all these long trench coats and all black. They're riding motorcycles. They're doing really cool things that you would do in like a cyber world in the world of anime. So you can say that anime and manga has a huge influence on The Matrix as well. But as I said, the style and the presentation of The Matrix is something that immediately catches a viewer's eye when you're watching it. Every scene that takes place in The Matrix has this weird green tint to it. Every scene that takes place in the real world has this bluish tint to it. So it was a really unique way to distinguish between the two, and it really makes sense. And I think that having that green tint actually adds to that cyberpunk feel. What I also picked up on this rewatch of The Matrix was not only martial arts influences, but Gothic influences. Think about these color palettes for a minute, and these green tints and these blue tints in this movie. As I said, every scene that takes place in The Matrix has a green tint, but it's also meshed well together with dark grays and blacks. All the characters are wearing leather, black, trench coats in The Matrix. It really presents a sort of gothic style, something similar to what the Underworld series does, where it has its own color palette. When you're watching the Underworld movies, you can see that much of the color paletting for those movies is this purplish, bluish, pinkish type of thing. And that tint kind of gives off this Victorian and gothic type of vibe that those movies are going for. And I feel like the greenish tint mixed with black and dark gray colors help add to the world of cyberpunk and martial arts and definitely a gothic style. I've never seen anybody classify The Matrix as a gothic type of style movie. It's not just gothic, it's not just cyberpunk, and it's not just martial arts. It's also a dystopian future, because this, what I'm occupying, what the movie is telling me is that this is The Matrix. This is a fake reality. So what is The Matrix? The Matrix essentially is this virtual simulation created by machines to imprison human beings. And now the human beings are at war with the machines. The human beings really scorched the sky. They took away all the solar power and all the solar energy. So now the machines have to harvest humans as a power source, as if they're farming human beings. And there's a scene like that in the movie. The scene where Neo wakes up and he's like, oh my God, holy shit. Like, where am I? Like, he's in a huge nest of seeds and pods, and then you see the Sentinels harvesting and giving power to those actual pods. Really, really interesting stuff. But if you're gonna try and destroy the Matrix, the machines are gonna send out what they call guardians to try and take you down, and that's exactly what they're trying to do with Neo, because Neo is the chosen one. He's the one who is prophesied to save mankind, and that's what Morpheus, who's played by Lawrence Fishburne, really believes. Matrix wants to destroy him once and for all so that they're not destroyed. So they're gonna send these guardians called agents. Agent Smith, played by Hugo Weaving, is one of the coolest protagonists ever. And what I love about The Matrix too is that you can bend the laws of physics and reality. Like, nothing really matters. You can walk on air, for Christ's sake. Basically a Jedi. That is immediately imminent in the opening scene of the movie with Trinity, one of my favorite characters in this entire trilogy. This scene immediately spikes your interest if you have no idea what The Matrix is about. It not only presents so many questions that will be answered later on in the movie, but it also provides a unique visual style for the action sequences and the really sweet visual effects that are present throughout the movie, as well as being very tense and suspenseful. So this is an opening for a sci-fi movie, a very brainy sci-fi movie at that. There's a lot to think about with The Matrix. They throw a lot of exposition right at you. The whole scene where Morpheus explains to Neo what The Matrix is and what actual reality is, that's all just exposition. I'm not against exposition like this, because at least there's something constantly happening, and you have the questions and you want the answers, and the movie is giving you the answers. There's at least enough going on in the background, or at least something that seems interesting. The lines of dialogue are things you can actually think about that will pique your interest. So while the movie is very expository, it's actually very well done in that regard. And I can't commend the Wachowskis enough for explaining this world and making it so brainy, because if you do that, it gets to the point where it gets convoluted and super confusing. There are a couple of things where it's like, yeah, it might be a little bit hazy. Every time I watch The Matrix, I pick up on something new. So I would say I understand about 98% of what happens in The Matrix. Of course, there's going to be a couple things that are loose cannons here and there, you know? But that's what the sequels are for, right? And when I talk about The Matrix getting brainy, I think it really is brainy sci-fi, because it relies a lot on philosophical themes. Not so much in this one as opposed to the sequels. I really actually love how the philosophical themes are presented in this movie. How they're more subtle and there's that underlying subtext of philosophical themes. I love the actual broader themes of the movie, and I'll talk about those more in a minute, but in terms of some philosophical themes, like, oh, you have like this oracle who's the be-all, end-all. For me, watching this movie on rewatch, that was the baseline of the philosophical themes in this movie. So I love that there's that undercurrent and that subtext of those themes without being so in your face about it, like say Reloaded and Revolutions are. There's a lot of Christ metaphors. I mean, Neo, if you switch Neo around, it literally spells one, so he is the one savior. they're treating Neo like he's Jesus Christ. That gets a little heavy-handed, but not to the point where it's beating you over the head with it. You know, I mean, it is a Chosen One prophecy movie, so yeah, it is gonna get annoying after a while. But it is what it is. It was one of the first Chosen One prophecy movies that I'm aware of. But the broader themes of the movie are really the ones that strike the most resonance with me. Choice versus control. Reality versus fantasy. False truth versus actual truth. Nothing is as we think it is in real life, and are we living in a simulation? It really toys with your brain when you actually think about concepts like that this movie presents, to the point where you kind of start to become obsessed about it. And I think that's what happened with people with the sequels. Reloaded and Revolutions just got really philosophical, and I think it just made I think those two movies just made people think way too hard about actual philosophical themes and maybe dig too deep into the movie when there's really not that much digging into this first movie, and you can just look at the broader themes as really emotional, resonant themes that I was surprised actually really held up for me on rewatch. And talking about things holding up on rewatch, the visual effects are astounding for 1999. Every action scene is in frame. The fighting styles and how they're fighting, it blows my mind. Even as a kid, I never used to watch this full movie. I just used to put it on at the lobby shooting spree and then watch till the end. But like even then, just watching the lobby shooting spree scene, which is by far my favorite sequence in the entire movie. As a kid, as that 6-year-old who probably should not have watched The Matrix but did when he was 6 years old, I probably should not have watched Saving Private Ryan when I was 5 years old, but I did anyway. It was mind-blowing. It was like the coolest thing I had ever seen. You know, back in the day, how parents are like, oh my god, like all black trench coats. Here's a story for you. My brother brought this movie over to his friend's house, and they were watching it, and his friend's dad actually came into the room, and he saw all the characters in all black, sunglasses, long trench coats, and he was like, hey, are you guys watching? My brother told him, and he said, so what's the movie rated? And my brother was under the impression that The Matrix was rated PG-13, and it wasn't. It was rated R, and he got screamed at. But that's like how cool everybody thought The Matrix was. Even if you weren't of age, you were watching The Matrix because you had heard so much about it from other people that you just had to witness it for yourself no matter what your age was. Well, okay, maybe 3-year-olds didn't watch this movie, but if I was 6 or 7 watching this movie, okay, maybe 3-year-olds did watch it. I have no idea. But you would think parents would be like, hey, we can't watch that because trench coats and all black and it's a big gothic. So let's keep our kids away from that. And I can almost guarantee, I could be wrong, but I bet you The Matrix did come under fire later in the year with the Columbine High School massacre because those kids dubbed themselves the Trenchcoat Mafia. It led to a lot of limited releases and blocked releases, like the Boondock Saints was a limited release, only released in the Boston area because of the fallout and the consequences and the fear that there were going to be copycat killers from the Columbine massacre, and they didn't want to glorify violence. And they didn't want to glorify all black and trench coats. They thought movies like that, and I would assume after the shooting, because I believe that this movie came out before the Columbine High School massacre, I would assume that The Matrix led to fears that there's going to be copycat killers. So that, I guess, in a way that's influential in how we consume the news as well. But I feel like I'm going off on tangents. Let's just talk about some of my favorite sequences of the movie. I've already talked about the lobby shooting spree, the bullet time sequence and that. It's so great when Neo bends backwards to dodge the bullets from Agent Johnson. So good. Trinity going up to one of the agents and shooting him and saying, dodge this. The entire last 20 to 25 minutes of the movie, probably one of my favorite third acts of an entire movie. Yes, it does venture more into action movie territory, and that's been some of the criticism with The Matrix, but hey, you know what? The payoff was worth it. Neo and Trinity are going into the Matrix to save Morpheus, who is captured by the agents because they need these access codes to the mainframe in this human city called Zion. It's the last human city. They capture Morpheus, and Neo and Trinity go back into the Matrix to go save Morpheus. So yeah, obviously at this point, it's going to become an action movie, and a lot of people have said, well, yeah, that's not really the problem. The problem is that all the action movie cliches are present in that third act, and I agree. However, The Matrix is already such a good movie, and it offers mind-bending action sequences in that third act, despite playing into those action movie cliches, that those action movie cliches feel like an afterthought to me. That's how good The Matrix is. At staging its action and ramping up the tension and suspense, and this movie flies by. It's 2 hours and 16 minutes, and it feels like it's an hour and 45. It's got such a good pace to it, and it throws you right into everything. As I've already mentioned, the opening scene with Trinity being chased by the agents and her exiting the Matrix by getting to the payphone, that's another really cool thing. I like how you enter into the Matrix through technology, you exit out of the Matrix through technology. We're introduced to Neo, and I love that whole scene where he's got to go through the office because the agents are coming after him. He's going to run through the office, and he has to go out onto the building and climb up some scaffolding. He's like, oh shit, I don't want to do this. It's all really suspenseful stuff, and it's all mind-blowing. Matrix was just so original and unique and fresh that the brainy aspects of it work even more on rewatch. Even though all of the exposition is thrown at you all at once, your questions are answered and it all makes sense. I could watch The Matrix any day of the week. It's not only one of the greatest sci-fi movies ever made, it's one of the most groundbreaking, influential sci-fi movies and movies in general ever made, that even if The Matrix Resurrections is good, no film in the series is going to top this original film. And I don't think I've been this invested in a modern day sci-fi movie like this, other than Edge of Tomorrow or Blade Runner 2049 probably. Mixing a cyberpunk, gothic, dystopian, martial arts style and presentation with the cliches of action movies, but making those cliches an afterthought because of how unique and fresh and original The Matrix is. This movie is going to stand the test of time. As you guys know, with these classic reviews, I do letter grades, and if you haven't figured it out by now, I am giving The Matrix an A+. The Matrix is so damn good. If you have yet to see The Matrix, definitely check out The Matrix. I can't wait to talk about Reloaded and Revolutions because, oh boy, I think there's going to be some hot opinions there that people are probably going to like or dislike. And that means I have to sit through Reloaded and Revolutions, and then we're gonna get to Resurrections. Thanks guys for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.